Hey guys, welcome back to the Cereal and Midnight podcast. I want to set up the episode, the discussion that you're about to be a part of, because we're talking to animation legend Phil Roman, the founder of Film Roman, 6-time Emmy winner for Garfield, all those Garfield specials, The Simpsons. He also talks about his time working at Disney, working on Sleeping Beauty. He was there the very first day of Disneyland. He talks about working with Chuck Jones. He talks about working on How the Grinch Stole Christmas, Horton Hears a Who, all the way through the Peanuts specials of the 1970s. We're also talking to Jason and Sean Mendelson from Lee Mendelson Film Productions because this is the 50th anniversary of You're a Good Sport, Charlie Brown. Now, it's also the 50th anniversary of Be My Valentine, Charlie Brown, and Mr. Roman worked on both of those specials. This is the 50th anniversary, so that opens the door. I'm so grateful that I have this established relationship with the Mendelsons because these doors open to conversations that are really sort of once-in-a-lifetime conversations. Getting to talk to Phil Roman about working on these specials, about his career in animation, about working with Vince Goraldi. This is the stuff that's, it's so humbling. And you're going to be a part of this. So Mr. Roman is 94 years old. And the history that he is about to recount for you guys in this interview is absolutely breathtaking. I also want to talk about this release. So part of it, we're going to talk to Mr. Roman, and then Jason and Sean and I are going to talk about this release of Your Good Sport Charlie Brown. It's on vinyl, it's on digital, it's on CD. This is a special one because it's a Zoatrope vinyl, and if you don't know what that is, this is my first Zoatrope record. It's a really cool idea. So this is the record itself. If you're listening to the audio version, if you head over to YouTube, you can see the video of what I'm actually talking about. You're going to see this thing come to life. So it's got the imagery from the special on it, and as it plays, because, Zoatrope, so it comes to life. The visuals on the record itself come to life. It is absolutely incredible. So we're going to talk about this, but we're also going to talk to Mr. Roman. So this is really an interview in two parts. I'm going to say the first part of this is the discussion with Mr. Roman, and Jason and Sean they do interject a little bit further into the interview, but they kind of lay out and just let Mr. Roman tell his stories. And then after we say goodbye to Mr. Roman, we talk about this soundtrack release, where it comes from, how it sounds. We got 4 bonus tracks, where these bonus tracks come from. This is absolutely incredible stuff, and I know that you guys are here for it because these Peanuts soundtracks are doing very well, and there's been a lot of interest from you guys. You guys make these interviews really special, and I'm grateful to the Mendelsons for this. I'm grateful to you guys for watching it. Listen, let's get to it because we got a lot of ground to cover here, and this is so much history. This is so much information. Thanks to Mr. Roman. It is an absolute pleasure to have talked to Mr. Roman. Without further ado, Phil Roman, Jason and Sean Mendelson, and 50 years of You're a Good Sport, Charlie Brown. Before we hit record, you were talking about how you had just watched the You're a Good Sport, Charlie Brown special again. This is the 50th anniversary of that special, and another one that you directed. You also directed Be My Valentine, Charlie Brown, which is also the 50th anniversary this year.
Really?
What sort of, so do you remember the time period? What sort of comes back to you when you think about working on those specials at that time? Do you have good memories, good times?
I was in heaven because, I started at Bill Melendez, who was the one that was doing the studio that was doing the Peanut specials, and I was there as an animator, and one day Bill comes in with a big stack of drawings and stuff, and says, "Cheryl, I got busy. Can you take over the directing of this?" And so it was the Thanksgiving special. So those were very, very happy memories for me. The fact that I would be trusted to direct the Charlie Brown project, because to me, those were just little gems, stories, And the thing is that my connection with the Peanuts really goes back when I was in high school. I wanted to be a cartoonist, and there were no art schools there, and so I did a correspondence course. And my guess who my instructor was? Charles Schultz. He was my instructor, and he would correct uh, my drawings and give me tips and stuff. And so I was about maybe still in high school at that time, but so my ties to Charles Schultz go way back to when I was still in high school, and then to be working at the studio that created the specials. That was extra special for me, and all of those shows really had a simple message. And the great part about it, you knew you were doing the right thing, because every time the show aired, it won its time slot on CBS, and they were constantly nominated for Emmys and winning. I felt I was at the right place at the right time, and when I got my opportunity to direct.
Do you think sometimes about the many millions of people that have watched not just the Peanut specials, but also the Garfield specials? I mean, it is tens, if not hundreds of millions of people.
Oh, yeah. It's two shows that I've really been blessed to have been part of, the first two shows on Garfield were done at Bill Melendez. Here Comes Garfield and Garfield on the Town. And from what I understand, Sparky wasn't too happy with that, because he wanted Bill to be just a Peanuts creator. And about that time, in 1983, I was contemplating opening up my own studios, just moving on, and trying on my own, going up on my own. And so at the end of '93, I told Bill that I was leaving the studio to open up my own studio. So he said, okay, we had a goodbye party. And Lee Mendelson comes in and to see me one day. He says, what do you have to work on? Where are you going? I said, I don't know, I'm just going to try to find some projects and get started. He says, how would you like to do Garfield? I said, that would be terrific. He says, well, Sparky's not too happy with Bill doing it. So if he can do it, that would be a big help for the studio here. And anyway, so he told me to find a place, the location, and he would get the approval of the syndicate and Jim Davis and the network. And sure enough, they all agreed. And so I opened up a little two-room studio in Toluca Lake. And so that was the start of Film Ruin. And again, Garfield, the first show that I produced on my own, Garfield on the Rough, not only did we do it on budget and on time, but it also won an Emmy. And so we were doing the right thing. And so from there on, we went on to do that, not like Garfield, but we just grew and grew and grew to the Bobby's World. Eventually did the Simpsons and the Critic, and Bobby's World, a lot of Tom and Jerry, and just grew to from 3 people to over 500. So I think we did the right thing.
Yeah, I think so. And 6 Emmys. You won 6 Emmys over the career.
Yeah, that's right. There were 3 for Garfield and 3 for the Simpsons. So I feel very, very fortunate that I think that I made the right decision.
What led you into animation in the first place? You were talking a little bit about a high school. I know you had is it true you had a scholarship to the Hollywood Art Center School?
No. I graduated in 1948, and most of the kids went on to college, and I didn't have the wherewithal. So I just stayed in Fresno, and where I come from, Fresno, California, and worked in a theater, because I had been inspired by Bambi, the Disney movie, and watching I was working at the Warner Brothers Theater in Fresno, and watching the cartoons from Warner Brothers, different kind of cartoons, just wacky, and it was zany and a lot of fun. And so after a while, I saved $60, and I said, I'm going to go to next year, 1949. I was 18 years old. I got on a Greyhound bus, and there was $60 pocket, and a letter of recommendation from my manager for a job. And I got a Greyhound bus and came to Los Angeles, and not knowing anybody here. So I got a job in downtown Los Angeles at the Warner Brothers Theater there because of the recommendation. So the next day I had a job, and then I looked for in the Yellow Pages for art schools, art taught animation, specifically animation. And there was only one, that was Hollywood Art Center in Hollywood. So I called, and they said, yeah, come on down, I will talk to you. And so I had $60 in my pocket there. And so I talked to the owner, Mr. Levins, and he said, okay, you can come to the school, but you have to pay $15 a week and $30 down, and you can take an animation class plus other basic art classes. So anyway, it was I was in heaven, because there was studying from animation from Ted Bonnickson, who's a terrific animator, and I found a place to live near the school for $6 a week. So that was in my budget.
Wow. Was it what kind of place did you get for $6 a week?
I could find one room in an old mansion, like right off of the main master bedroom upstairs. It was like a little study that had a bed in there and a little closet. And anyway, it was worth it. Believe me, I was in heaven. I couldn't believe it, but I was unlucky. And the Korea War started, and I signed up for the draft. And before I got drafted, I signed up for the Air Force. So in January 1951, I joined the Air Force for 4 years.
Well, I know you ended up at Disney and working on the 55 Sleeping Beauty project.
Oh, yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah. I had been in radio transmission, communications in the Air Force. And when I got out in December, I spent the holidays at home, with my parents, with my family. And so in January, I just left, or I came back to LA to go to art school. I went to Art Center School, which is a bigger school, and on the GI Bill. And one day, I was during a break, I heard of my student mates talking about that Disney was hiring, and that really got my attention. So what I did was, then I called the studio, and they said, "Yeah, we're hiring. Just bring a portfolio, and we'll go from there." So I put together a portfolio real quick and made an appointment to go see. So Andy England, he was in charge of assistants and apprentices, in-betweeners. And so he saw my portfolio, and I told him I studied under Ted Bonnickson, which impressed him. And so I was hired as an apprentice for 1 month at 99 cents an hour. And so I didn't care. I was at Disney. And man, I was in heaven. This is where I wanted to be, And now you're not going to get me out of here. You start at the bottom, doing in-between, which is drawings that kind of the action. And so I worked on Sleeping Beauty, I worked on some Donald Ducks, I worked on some Mickey Mouse Club, I worked on some Wonderful World of Disney. And the studio had so much energy. You can't believe how great it was working there. It's very inspiring and very, you just don't want to leave. And
those were some magical years too. That was when the television era is beginning at that time.
That's right. So stuff for television and for kids, and stuff for the Wonderful World of Disney on ABC. Anyway, it was just like the perfect job. And so anyway.
Did you have any interaction with Walt himself?
I think I met him once, kind of casually, very casually, because I was assistant to one of the top animator at the studio. So it kind of got through there, you know. But anyway, it was a very inspiring time. A lot of energy. Just walk in the building and you feel the energy all in the hallways. You know, just very inspiring. All because of one person, Walt Disney, and his dreams and his energy just transformed the whole studio.
How did you end up working on How the Grinch Stole Christmas? Because that was a little bit later. That was about a decade later. That was 1966.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. I was at Disney, and I thought I'd be there forever, but I wanted to animate. Actually, I was an assistant, and John Freeman, I was an assistant to him, and he went to San Francisco and got a job there as an animator, and he called me from there, from San Francisco. Said, "So why don't you come down to San Francisco?" And so I quit, and like about October of '56, and because I got a job there. One of the things that I'd mentioned, I started there in May of '55 at Disney, and I was at the opening of Disneyland in July 1955. The first day, that was a big to do, but anyway, that was part of my Disney experience. But then I went to San Francisco. When I left Disney, everybody was saying, you know, you're leaving the best studio in the world. You're just, you'd be sorry you left. Andy Ingman said, you know, we don't hire back anybody that quits. So, but I already had in mind that I was going to be animating. And so I was in San Francisco for about 3 years. And when I came back to 1960, Disney had a big layoff. All the people that told me that I was making a big mistake, they had been laid off at Disney. And I came back with a sample reel. And so I showed the sample reel, and I got a job in one of the first series, especially for television, which is King Leonardo and its short subjects, and which is in syndication. It's a funny little show. And so from there I bounced from one studio to another, because the shows lasted the season, then you get laid off. And so eventually I got a job at that place. I met Benny Washam. Benny Washam is one of the guys, one of the animators, whose name I used to see in Fresno on the Warner Brothers cartoons. And so Benny, I got to be a friend of Benny. And one day I was working, doing commercials, and Benny said, today's my last day. I'm going to go work for Chuck Jones. I said, Chuck Jones? He says, yeah, Warner Brothers is starting, and MGM is starting a new studio. And they hired Chuck to be the director. And so I said, can you get me in there? I would love to be there as an assistant or whatever. And so the next Monday he called me and said, there's one opening, and that's for an assistant animator. So I said, I'll take it. So I was animator, so I took a step backward. Anyway, I got to meet with Chuck and all his great animators. And one of the working of Tom and Jerry. So we did several Tom and Jerry's. And we did what the Grinch was one of the specials. And working on it was, you knew it was special. You knew it was special because it had the character, the story, the voices, Boris Karloff. And it's just a great story. He also did another Dr. Seuss they called The Horton Hears a Who, and the Phantom Tollbooth feature. So anyway, there was a variety
That
of
was one of
projects.
my favorites, by the way. Phantom Tollbooth Phil is one of my favorites when I was a child. Excellent.
Really? Yeah.
Yes.
I was an animator on one that. That was one of my highlights.
So it's around this time that so 1968. You work on He's Your Dog, Charlie Brown, doing graphic blandishment. So I think that's your first Peanuts related project, right? Or do you remember?
What year?
That was 1968.
Yeah, yeah. I worked on that on a freelance basis. I was working at Chuck Jones, but I went to Bill Melendez because of I liked the work that he was doing, and so I picked up some freelance animation. That's how I got involved with Bill. He gave me some freelance animation to work at home, and well, I had my day job, then I would do my freelance job at night, and so he liked my animation. So when I was out of work, that's when he hired me in the 70s, about 74.
Within
70.
5 years, you go from an animator to directing, and then you're
Yeah,
producing and directing all of these. So that's quite a leap.
yeah, that was a very emotional, very satisfying, self-satisfying thing that I knew that I was doing the right thing. Working on some great projects. The Peanut specials, which was very special. The Garfield specials were very, very special. It was so special that CBS made it a Saturday morning cartoon series. And so anyway, I felt very fortunate, very blessed to be a part of the history of animation.
Jason and Sean have been releasing these wonderful soundtracks of the Vince Goraldi music that's sourced
Yes,
from the tapes that they've found. Do you have any
yes,
memories of working with Vince Goraldi? Any sort of behind the scenes stories that you might be able to share? How he was to deal with, or if you ever even did deal with him?
the first project I did was the Thanksgiving show. And I dealt directly with John Scott Troder, who, according to what I heard, Vince couldn't read music. And so they hired John to actually write down the score on paper for the musicians. And so John came in, and I went over the storyboard and say, this is a kind of music for this scene. And he would take notes. It's the type of sound you want, And when John died, John Scott Ryder, in fact, I first heard about him on radio. He used to be Bing Crosby's music director way back in the old days. And when I used to hear him on radio, but when John passed away, then I started dealing with Vince. He was a good guy to deal with. His imagination was terrific.
You were at the helm when Vince Guaraldi passed away. Do you remember
Yes,
having to fill those shoes? Because his music had become so synonymous with those specials.
absolutely, absolutely, from the very beginning. And he died just doing a session near Palo Alto on the weekend. So all of a sudden, we had to deal with. Lee had to find somebody to take his place, and I forget now who it was, but I think it might have been Ed Bogus and another lady.
Did it feel different working on Garfield than it did on Peanuts? Was there a different energy to the different projects, or was it sort of the same feeling?
No, no, totally different. The Peanuts had a certain energy between the different characters. Snoopy, to me, Snoopy was the real star. He was the only character you could really animate as an animated character. The other ones were kind of round, and 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 Garfield was kind of a slow thing, but a different kind of stories. And Jim Davis used to have some terrific stories for Garfield. A big variety of them. Some are based on live action movies and stuff like that. But anyway, they're just different kind of storytelling, different kind of character, because they all react differently. Garfield had Odie as a pawn. He used to kind of use him as a whipping boy. They were great characters.
Can I just, if I may, Phil, this is our album. I don't know how much we're sending you a copy of this probably next week. I'm sorry I didn't get to you before the interview, but this is all the work you did, and it's becoming a zoetrope. I don't know if you're familiar with the zoetrope, but when the record spins, all of the scenes that you worked on and directed come to life. And one of my favorite images is this pumpkin helmeted Charlie Brown from You're a Good Sport, Charlie Brown. Do you remember animating or working on directing the scenes with that pumpkin juice falling down on his face or any of that?
I don't remember any specific scene.
That's fine.
Some of the things I remember are like Snoopy playing tennis. And one of the things also that I noticed was kind of different. And when an unusual Peanuts scene, when you hear an adult that goes wah 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 wah, but in this one, you're a sport, Charlie Brown. When they're playing tennis, somebody's saying love. They're actually calling out the actual score.
Well, I know Heath might have one more question, or Jason might, but Phil, I just want to personally thank you. I just want to thank you real quick, Jason, then he'll ask you or tell you something. But when Jason and I were 12, you took us around. Our dad took us to the Simpsons when I was 12 years old, Simpsons season 4, Conan O'Brien's years, when he wrote some of those episodes you were involved with. And it was the greatest dreamlike sequence. I can't believe it happened to me. Now I watch the same shows. I think I told you at our dad's funeral with my son. Yeah. So thank you for your contributions on all the fronts. Jason, you can ask him or tell him whatever you want.
Well, and Phil, I was going to say, I remember fondly going down and seeing you at Bill's when you guys were working on the Peanuts shows when I was a kid, and it was a dream because I only ever saw the Sean and I both got to be voices. We only ever saw the final product. So we'd go down to visit you guys in Sherman Oaks and see what you were doing. It always blew me away how brilliantly you guys put everything together and to see it come to life. And I remember the same trip when we went I think we were in middle school. No, it was before that. Sean's trip was the Simpsons trip. I remember when Film Roman opened and you were doing the Garfields on Saturday mornings, I got to go down and see the hundreds of people that you'd started to collect to work on the shows and how magical that was because you had so many people coming together to pull off the Simpsons and Garfield and everything else. And you were always so gracious and so nice. And I remember my father would go around and show it. And even though he'd been doing it with you for decades, he was always blown away by what you guys were able to pull off. And so I just thought I wanted to share that with you.
I want to thank you so much, not just for your time talking to me, but for what you've done for animation, for what you've done for entertainment, the multiple companies that you founded. You are a true American success story, and it is such a pleasure for me to speak to you. So thank you for what you've given us.
Thank you. To me, it's been a great ride. I had a dream, and it became much more than what I ever dreamed of. It's just been very, very blessed, and to actually communicate with people in this country. But these shows are around the world. I go to Europe, and everybody knows the shows that I worked on and is familiar with them. So American animation just travels very well. And I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
We can wrap up there with you. Anything else?
Just thank you for being here today. Thank you for your time. Our dad always sang your praises. We've
Love getting to work with you.
We've been honored to meet all the people our dad's worked with over the years and getting to know them even more recently, the sidemen that Goraldi worked with. So thank you for coming on here.
My pleasure. Sorry if I wasn't very lucid, but
you're wonderful.
Amazing.
Wonderful.
You're amazing.
You have a better recall than I have now.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
He sounds almost identical to Bill Melendez. Same affectation and accent, and they're from the same generation. They had the same profession. They're from the same backgrounds, and relatively speaking. And
both are Mexican American, yeah.
And I spoke to Bill all the time. I spoke to Phil less frequently, but I forgot. It was just like being a kid and hearing them talk about the stuff they did. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, he actually took us around the Simpsons headquarters at the height.
When I went down, we did a thing for a school fundraiser, and the top money-making enterprise was a flight down to LA to go to the Simpsons studio, which was Film Roman.
Yeah.
they were still doing it, and it made a lot of money for the school, and it was no joke. It was a legit studio. Bill's was great, but it was always kind of in a residential setting, and it was very just organic, and everybody'd been there for 100 years, and everybody was doing their thing. And Phil's deal was like real network delivery every week. You know, we had the benefit of most of our things were specials. They were not the demand as hardcore as the Saturday morning show that Phil did for Garfield and Friends. And just, you know, I just watched the Pee Wee Herman documentary. The top 3 things on TV on Saturday were Garfield and Friends, Pee Wee's Playhouse, and Garfield. And
those were my favorite.
Ninja
All
Turtles
3
were the 3 biggest things for almost half a decade.
Yeah.
So, Sean, was that your prompt? Was that you
producing?
My
prompt for Jason. But Heath, if you don't mind,
talk about the soundtrack.
Yeah, talk about the soundtrack, because my kids are going to be home in 20 minutes. I'd love to get some information out if that's okay.
I'm happy to talk about whatever you want to talk about, and I'm happy to talk about the soundtrack as well.
Yeah, let's talk about the soundtrack, because the liner notes, you guys you're so hands-on with these that between Sean's analysis of the music itself and Jason, here's the big picture, you know, like you really are just kind of guiding us through these things. So this is the opportunity to do that very thing. Like, why this sound, obviously it's the 50th anniversary, so that's why. But I know from past conversations, you weren't sure about this one. And you even say that in your notes. You're like, well, you know, we weren't sure about this. Talk a little bit about that.
Let me go first, Sean, really quick. This one was always one of my favorite shows. It's got the most action. It's super out of the norm. It's kind of like the Race for Your Life movie that came out, I think, right after this. There's a lot of action. There's a motocross race. All that was inspired by Craig Schultz, who writes the opening liner note. He's the inspiration for the show that his father, Charles Schultz, wrote. But in finding the music, it's one of the first things we found. And a lot of the soundtrack is the same motocross song repeated over and over again. And so there's a lot of, if not redundancy, there's a lot of the same drive that fuels the action, because in this show, they don't need a theme for a character as much as they need just the action. But what happened was we got biased. We got prejudiced against it because it was this synthesized ARP sound that we celebrate with Valentine's as well. It was the new toy in 75 for Vince Galdi, but it also just seemed like there wasn't enough there. There were only a couple of bonus pieces, and actually we didn't even put all the bonuses on there because they're more motocross. They're just other versions of motocross, but we found other things to use instead of that. But what was interesting was, as we listened to the music, we fell in love with it. Again, even the redundancy of motocross, there's different nuances to it. So for us as curators of this, we're like, oh, this is cool. Where did he introduce this? Or why would this be something different in this scene than in that scene? But also the front of the show has great stuff. There's a song that was called You're a Good Sport, Charlie Brown, which ended up being called Center Court. I'm part of the cue sheets.
If I could interrupt, Phil said earlier during this interview, he mentioned that scene as the memory he has directing this episode. That's the one that Jason just referenced, where Snoopy's playing tennis in a Joe Coolish type of a motif there, it's called Center Court originally, and You're a Good Sport, Charlie Brown, the title theme from the show.
And the reality is the show is about everybody's a bad sport. Snoopy's smashing his racket. The others are just getting angry at each other. They're just terrible sports. So, of course, even Snoopy's kind of mischievous as the Mass Marvel, which is a character that was not first in this show, but I think is the most prominent because he's the Mass Marvel for the whole show, competing with Charlie Brown. All of that made this really exciting as a show, but was not as originally interesting to us musically as some of the other soundtracks. But I do think one of the things we found was not only are there amazing things like the You're a Good Sport, Charlie Brown, the original, I'll give you this story from the liner notes too. We didn't find it till after we'd already mixed it. One of the pieces of the show, the original cue sheet had the opening song was You're a Good Sport, Charlie Brown. And it's got some similarities to motocross, but we thought, well, maybe this is a mistake Vince made because it's not the right song. It's not matching the timing. Nothing is making sense. And it turned out that the original song he recorded first, Q1, which is the start of the B side of the record, was never used in the show. And we can't tell you why. It's totally fine. Obviously, he chose to go to motocross because he set something else up differently for the way the song was done. But the original theme song of the show never made the show and was lost to history until we just found it. And so that's a really cool piece that we were like, wow, that's cool. We could talk about that. We can add that in. The Great Pumpkin Waltz is only used in Great Pumpkin until here 10 years later, almost 10 years later. It's really cool. Only 40 seconds, but he didn't record that other than the television show. So we get all these little pieces, another Pepper Patty, another Linus and Lucy, always diverse. Linus and Lucy being the most used composition across the 11 years of specials, and Pepper Patty being the second most used composition across all the specials. So you get all this other cool history and music too. And I think that's what made it fun for us. So again, I appreciate your comment. We love putting the liner notes together because it's really the journey. You get to go on the journey we went on in putting these records together. And that's, we hope, part of the fun of this.
Well, I see the evolution of it too, because when it started, what was it, like 2 years ago? Whenever it started, it's like it has evolved over these. Like now you've got like this one, you've got the Mr. Schultz introduction about like I was riding my motorbike, and then you've got Derek Bang giving his historical perspective. Then you've got Sean talking about like let's break it down, and then you with your big picture context about like you sort of bring the heart to it, really. You know, you're like, here's the magic of Peanuts, and between those four pieces, it really is this overarching like all encompassing. There's like different facets of why this is special. Sean, do you have an ARP? I'm curious, do you own an ARP?
I do not. One of the
we got to get one, right?
Yes, one of the wonderful things about this experience is the discovery of instruments. And we just did an interview with Peanuts. I don't know when this is going to air, obviously, but the folks at Peanuts, I had mentioned to them that our dad has stated to me personally, and then in books, that the first time he ever heard of a Moog synthesizer was when Vince Galdi brought it up to him. And so, and as Jason said a minute ago, October 1974, I believe, is when the ARP string ensemble synthesizer came onto the market. And it was so new that they only made a limited run of them, but he was one of the first people to record with it. He was also one of the first people to record with a click track called a Rhythm Ace. And we talked to Mark Rosengarten, the drummer, about that. I put that in the liner notes as well. The only people that have done that were his contemporaries, were Sly and the Family Stone in the late 60s, because they kind of creatively embarked on recording sessions with click tracks or drum machines, more specific, not click tracks, but the drum machines would act as click tracks, which is an idea of keeping the whole band in time in the studio. And I just want to quickly point out, Jason mentioned the unused cue. It's You're a Good Sport, Charlie Brown, and left on the cutting room floor. Why that's relevant is 95% of this is synthesized. It's Vince Goraldi at his synthesized orchestra, the fullest, most he ever took it by far in any other recording in his history, Peanuts or otherwise. But that first take, you get to hear how great You're a Good Sport, Charlie Brown is without the ARP synthesizer. And the unused cue is a smoother, less abrasive version of the cue. It's more ethereal in that respect. And so we're happy to present that as sort of what ended up being the draft of what ended up being used in the show for that title track.
And the other thing is we were pretty still new to record making, as we've discussed before. I think you were one of the first people we talked to when we first put a record together. And what we thought with this one was the show's so good. We have such great art from the show. How do we present this in a unique way for us and for Peanuts? And that's where we, Chris Bracco, who works for Peanuts, for Charles Schultz Creative Associates in Santa Rosa, said, hey, if you guys thought about doing the Zoatrope, I go, what are you talking about, Zoatrope? And I'm thinking, he thinks Francis Ford Coppola, he means like a light box that actually, there's these records that spin and they come to life. And so we've met with Drew Tetz, who was the one who functionally made it work and is the genius on this. And it was so perfect for this show because we had so many scenes that Phil directed of the animation that we could pick from to make it work. And I think we picked 9 scenes that appear on this record. There's 5 on one side and 4 on the other side, but it lent itself to this because it's action. It's a very dynamic Peanuts cartoon. And so we thought that was cool. And then even that, everything evolved. So the music evolved even after we mixed it. The record design evolved after we mixed it. And then we added more music later. And it all just sort of, I think, worked. And I'm just so thrilled to get this one out there too. Because again, it's its 50th anniversary. It is the penultimate. It's this, the second to last thing Vince did. And it is, like Sean said, it's a product of the 70s for good or for ill, but it really does work and it sounds pretty cool. I mean, again, the A side is all eclectic tunes. It's in the order of the show. Then on the B side, we start with the unused cue, and people might be upset about us for that. We're not going in order there, but we didn't have I didn't want to put it at the end. I didn't want to put it at the beginning because I didn't want to confuse it with the actual first cue of the show. But we decided to put it on the start of the B side. And then you get into you hear all the motocross stuff. And then we end with these bonus tracks of Vince Goraldi from Bicycles Are Beautiful, which is an industrial film that Vince did for our father and with our father. And that one is totally different. It's this bicycle sounding thing. There's 4 tracks from that, and they're an amalgamation. It's only a 50-minute industrial film, I believe, and it's a combination of different performances from that are not in necessarily order they were in that, but they're just the bonus track that we thought would be fun, that are from the same year or from within a year of the Good Sport. So we're really proud of that too. Sean's notes, if you go through this, you get a pedagogical musicological lesson from 1960, from The Great Pumpkin, although our liner notes are very sparse for Great Pumpkin for Kraft, but from Short Summer on through to this one now, Good Sport, you get both the history of the music, as Derek Bang describes the history of what was going on behind the scenes. Sean gives you his interpretation of what happened with the music. And I find it fascinating because a lot of this we knew a lot of this going in, but getting the tapes and sitting together and working on this is where we really discovered and asked more questions of the sidemen and other experts in music to really get a full appreciation of all the neat stuff that Vince did and was allowed to do in these great cartoons that came on every few months or every twice a year over this period. So it was pretty, thrilling to then share that with whoever's interested in it. I love that you read it and said what you said, because we don't get a lot of feedback, obviously, because we're doing this sort of behind the scenes stuff. And so it's great to hear people liking that. And I really appreciate what you said about me. I'm just trying to tell people why I like making the records. I don't know if it has any use to anybody beyond that, but
do you guys see, do you know your roles? Like, do you see how clearly defined your roles are? Because they're very distinct.
We weren't initially. I'll speak for myself. Jason might have
Jason looked befuddled. He was like, I don't know.
Well,
he started to hear what Sean's saying.
Jason started using the term musicologist, which I appreciate and accept. I'd say 2 or 3 albums ago, but it's accurate because that's where I'm comfortable. That's what I'm competent in. And that's what I've been enjoying about this process is the analyzing of why this music is so indelible. And when he did Charlie Brown Thanksgiving, we kind of had to rush it out. So I'm the one who did the liner notes for that. So I did a little bit of history, a little bit of, but then I was like, you know what? I'm going to stay in my lane. And then Jason, like you said, does the overview or intro sometimes. And Derek puts it in historical context. So we did sort of fall into these sort of understood roles, I think, after Charlie Brown Thanksgiving.
And I think the beauty of it, like we always espouse about Bill and Sparky and Lee and Vince working together, and John Scott Troder and Phil Roman and everybody, is that we do everything collaboratively. So Sean and I Sean looks at everything I do. I look at everything he does. We do a lot of it together. And then we obviously have, I think, places where it makes sense to speak in our own voices in the different channels of what we're trying to say. So I do appreciate what you said, but I also think Sean has been involved in everything I've touched. And similarly, Derek Bang is very involved. We go through this with him too, because we want him to write the liner notes and he'll provide his historical context. The same with Seward McCainer, you were interviewed before twice, who we're able to collaborate, talking to everybody that we can to see if we can get the best understanding of what went into making these. Because again, these were made before we were born. And when we found these, we knew we were looking for them for a long time. But in discovering these, we feel a great deal of responsibility to not mess this up and to make this as good as we can for the public, with the end goal of saying, you all know Vince Galdi from Charlie Brown Christmas. Look at all this other stuff he was able to both perform and write that is just part of our cultural understanding and zeitgeist, but was never really exposed to people in this way before. So that's
I've been newly inspired. I always appreciated Vince Galdi, but going through this process, I've been inspired by the rebirth of his music, how much people are loving as much as Jason and I are, and the gratitude. That's the word I've been throwing around a lot lately, is I have tremendous gratitude to be able to work on this stuff.
And Sean's primarily a singer-songwriter, plays guitar. We both started on piano, and I want to do clarinet and other woodwinds and things, whatever, it doesn't matter. But we started together learning piano, and the first thing we did like one of the first performances we did is I played the right hand of Linus and Lucy, and he played the left hand of Linus and Lucy. And we'd sit down. It was like a parlor act we do at school or at various events. And Sean was really good. I was just older, so I got the right hand. But the deal was we always were we loved Vince Galdi. We knew it was one of our dad's friends. We knew his music our whole life, but we didn't get that other people might be interested in this or doing that. So as a kid, when we played the music, we thought, oh, look at this kitschy thing we're doing. But the reality was a ton of people, first thing they played in jazz was Linus and Lucy. It was not unique to our experience there.
Speaking of Linus and Lucy, if I may, sorry, Heath, I'm going to just jump in here on this one. Linus and Lucy on this soundtrack is the coolest synthesis of a scene and a Goraldi music cue, because in Charlie Brown Thanksgiving, the football gag where Lucy pulls the football away was accompanied by a Charlie Brown blues. But this time, he took the bridge section, as we've talked about with you before, Heath, and applied Linus and Lucy's bridge section to the football gag. And why it's effective is he does a paso doble, a bull, where you imagine seeing the bull with going through the red cape, where in this case, Lucy is holding the football. And so when I saw that scene, it didn't click with me. It's subconscious when you watch a show and hear the background music, but it became evident when we were analyzing this music that, oh my gosh, he perfectly married a Spanish style paso doble rhythm with a scene that's so much a part of the lore of Peanuts history. You know, it was in A Boy Named Charlie Brown, the movie, but this is the perfect football gag version in any show, in my opinion, because the music serves it the best.
The music is great, but we also hope that people go out and watch the show, which you can get. Like I said, there's a Warner Home Video version. It's on Apple TV for the subscribers. So part of this is to revitalize not just the music, but also these shows, because some of these cartoons, this one won an Emmy. It's not a holiday show, though. So many of your audience might not have ever heard of this one. There are some scenes I don't think they do today, specifically when Snoopy goes to the human hospital and Charlie Brown goes to the vet. I won't speak about what's going on there, but I don't remember when I was a kid. So I didn't know what was going on there, but there's interesting things.
Yeah, he's reading an interesting magazine is what he's doing.
It's in the book. It shows it in the book. This is also 75. So they didn't shy away from it, I guess.
Sean, I wanted to follow up on something that you said a few minutes ago, because the nature of these recordings from Vince Goraldi, they're ephemeral. They're intended to be ephemeral. You know, they were for a moment. And what we've learned from talking to these guys that worked on these things is that they weren't really premeditated. They weren't really written. They'd walk into the studio and Vince would be like, we're going to do it like this. And then they just take off and do something. So when you mention like the Spanish influence of the Matador thing, that's just in his head, you know, and we never really thought about this stuff or appreciated it in the moment, because one, we were probably kids, and two, that's not how they were designed. But because of what you guys are doing, we're able to really look at this stuff and examine it from the musical, not academic, but to get into the musical, like there's actual artistry, real genuine artistry that is being uncovered. So that kind of follows up on what you were saying about what these soundtracks afford the opportunity to do, which is to reevaluate.
Yeah, part of the magic I've mentioned with you and other people is obviously the simple melodies with some lush and interesting complex chords. That's what I think it was his gift to us as a musician, as an artist. But the other magical thing as you get deeper into this is that every show has its own character. I've said that every time we've been on here. The character of this show is action. It's movement. It's synth. These are things that are words that come out. And when I excuse my dog in the background, when I re-examine this music from the context of what he's supporting, this man has the ability to repurpose within the same show and across all 15 Peanut specials, the same tune, and make it just different enough that you're not bored of it, but also interesting enough that we can put soundtracks out and it's not just background music, you know? And so this particular album, like Jason said, it's grown on us. I'll be straight with you. It was one of my least favorite of the scores that Goraldi did. But now hearing it back to back and going through it and sifting through it, it brings to light some of these fun things like I mentioned before.
Yeah, I think that's actually maybe a good place to kind of wind it down.
I'm sorry, I just thought of one more thing, and then Jason can finish off the thing, Heath. Phil Roman mentioned earlier, John Scott Trotter was his interface for this show. This was the last show that John Scott Trotter music supervised on, the next show being the final show that Vince Galdi scored, which is It's Arbor Day, Charlie Brown. And I just wanted to point out that John Scott Troder was a big part of this whole piece. I don't talk about him enough. He helped organize the musicians and Vince Galdi in the studio in a way that really was the bridge between my dad and the musicians.
Okay, so this soundtrack is going to hit in July, and people can find it everywhere. I'll have links in the description of this episode where people can find it. And anything else you want to talk about for this particular release?
Sean and I and all of Mendelson Productions are very happy that we have finally been able to bring light to this mid-70s TV special soundtrack. We think the Zoatrope makes it fun. The CD, you get all the music. We think the bonus tracks are really interesting and fun. We love the art from this special. It's one of the best. And we think both the Peanuts fan and the Goraldi fan and 70s music fans that like experimental jazz will really get a kick out of this record in all its in all its release forms. I do think it's so funny. There's some people that love the thing that you might find the least intriguing, and there are people I already know who love one of the songs in this that I'm like, I could take it or leave it, but they love it. And when I get to hear people say, oh, I love that song so much on this certain album, it makes me feel really good because you realize everybody's got their own taste and their own interests in this music, but it is a great entry point, I think, for a lot of people to get into this kind of jazz because it is driving, marching, motocrossing piece of music, but it also tells another story of what Vince was doing, in his later 40s and right before his passing the next year. And it tells a story of 70s America and what some of the interesting things people were into, both motocross racing like Craig Schultz or musically like Vince Galdi with all his fun new experimental instruments that Sean was talking about. So we're really looking forward to it. And as you said, it comes out July 11th and all the CD and vinyl and digital. And as I said before, too, You're a Good Sport, Charlie Brown won the Emmy for Best Children's Program in 1976 for 1975. And you can watch the show as an Apple TV subscriber or buy the movie from Warner Home Video. And I hope people enjoy it. And as always, we love talking to you, Heath. I think you've done such a great job of curating all of these discussions about these records. I think you're one of the first people. I think Sean met you before me, and it was one of the first interviews we did talking about the records. And I think we've done it for everyone we've released with you. And we love doing that with you and really appreciate your time and interest and knowledge and expertise on all these things. And we really enjoy talking to you about it.
You're so enthusiastic about it that it is infectious. And I love getting to experience this music through the work that you've done on these. So thank you for this one. And until next time, right? We'll do it again soon, right?
The more people that keep expressing interest in this, the more we can do. And so far, we have had a really, really good time releasing these and hopefully more to come.
Thanks for having us, Heath. I appreciate you as always, my friend.